Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be chatting to you this evening. And the person that I'm speaking to tonight is Dr. Richard Hayward. I've been working with Richard for the last few years, where he has been a leader in terms of education in Tandawazi. And Tandawazi was one of my babies at St. Stithians. And he is just a pillar of strength and wisdom. And I've just loved the way he thinks and the way he engages with his students. He's written his book, which was part of his PhD and will tell us more about tonight. But this is the third edition. And I really thought it would be wonderful for you to be able to experience this book. So I invited him on to come and chat with us about his book. Richard was a principal at more than one school, and listening to the stories that he tells, how he loved his students, is just such a wonderful example for all of us to share as teachers. So, Richard, I'm so excited to be chatting with you this evening. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Karen. And of course, through the years, we've worked together on different projects. And you spoke about Tandalwazi, which is an outreach program for teachers from disadvantaged communities. And then to the folk who have tuned in, there are many ways to spend a Thursday night. But if you're listening to me, how brave you are. Over to you, Karen, with a sort of question you might like to ask me. And it's very much a chat. Yeah.
It is very much a chat. So, Richard, where did the idea of this book come from?
I would think that if I was to put a date to it, it would be the 27th of April, 1994. That was when we had our first democratic elections. And I think that across South Africa and across the world, people were very excited about a new world that was going to start for South Africa. And of course, people thought that the world would be, and South Africa, things would be better. And one of those areas was education, where it was so unfair in times gone past. Now there was an opportunity for us to have a new society, quality education for all. But anybody who lives in South Africa knows that that hasn't actually happened to the level we would like it to happen. Yes, in some ways the education system has got better, but in other ways it has actually degenerated. And so the book, that was one reason. The other one is that just as a teacher, I believe very strongly in the fact that we mustn't see education in a box. We must realize that education is part of society. So we learn and we see what happens elsewhere. So total quality education has taken ideas from the business world, the professional world, and brought them into the way the school system works. And then, of course, remember that South Africa is not unique in having to transform its education. Just think of Japan at the end of the Second World War, the bombs that fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the atom bombs in August 1945. That country was on its knees. It was shattered. And it managed to lift itself up. And how did it lift itself up? Through quality management systems. And of course, who helped them? The Americans. They brought in theories and practices from America. So in a way, that might be, say, the two reasons. 27th of April, 1994, and just the fact that across the world, we can have good schools.
But that's really interesting. So in terms of looking at change, and because of what was happening in our country, you developed the system that you refer to as quality education. So I know that you've got a description of it. So what does this model mean to people? How can people use it really effectively within their learning spaces?
Well, the model that you see, it has 5 pillars: values, leadership, improvement planning, communication, and techniques and tools. And each one of these pillars is essential if you want to create a quality school. You can't take one of them out and say the other four will hold it up. Each one is a critical factor. And of course, in the book, it just explains each one of these pillars. And it's also to remember, of course, that the book is titled Making Quality Education Happen, a how-to guide for teachers, but it's actually a how-to guide for anybody in a school, whether you're a first-year teacher, the principal of an all-boys secondary school, co-ed, monastic school, whatever. And the point is that if you just take the model and you implement the 5 pillars, it's impossible, I repeat, it's impossible not to have a quality school.
So if we took values, why do you think values is so important to have it as a pillar?
Well, values, to me, is the most important of the 5 pillars, because if you've got values in place, you are able to create a school that has a rock solid start to whatever else it does. So values, what do we mean by values? Well, I remember one kid just saying to me one day when he was explaining to somebody, this school's full of values. What is it all about? And then he just said, man, it just summa means this is the way we do things here. And he had a nice guttural accent about it as well. So, a school that has values, and please remember that no school has identical values to, say, its neighbor, that the values can change. And a very interesting one, for example, is that right now with COVID, a value that has come right up to the top is the sense, a value of compassion, because so many schools and so many teachers, families, they are having very hard times. And I think COVID has actually just made people more aware of the need to be compassionate towards each other. So that would be just an example. And then, of course, when I do workshops, it's quite fascinating. This little exercise I do where I say to folk, just write down values that you think are important. Write down 4 values. And it's fascinating that every single workshop that I've done, that one of the values that comes up every single time in the top 4 is respect. Just have respect. And if you have a school community that has respect, then this would be, you're really on the right road. And then, of course, if I may cite this funny little story, a kid had stepped out of line and he was brought down to me, and the teacher complained that he'd done something wrong.
Oh, yes.
And so I just chatted to him and I said, well, what's your side of the story? He said, well, in the school rules, and we only had a very few number, he says it's not one of the school rules.
Oh,
so I thought, well, this guy probably is going to become a lawyer one day. But I said to him, yes, but what is the school rule that is about all of them? And he looked at me and I said, isn't it do unto others as you'd have done unto you? Isn't that right, what it's all about? So in other words, you do to other people what you'd have them do unto you. Do you think you have done that? So he looked at me and then he looked out the window, and the young lawyer, age 12, couldn't find an answer to that. And then he says, and what must I do now? I'm offside.
Oh, shame. So I agree with you completely how important values are. And I think what you said about COVID and the way that's enhanced the awareness of values within schools has really impacted how teachers are engaging at the moment, and how communities are just rallying together to help support children in different ways. I mean, like you said, the compassion, where we've heard about children who haven't coped because they've had to be at home and haven't been able to socialize. If we now looking at a quality education, how do you think that then translates if you are at home and you're a parent having to cope with children? What are the kinds of tips that you could give to parents and give to teachers who are perhaps having to teach remotely, or perhaps do these hybrid lessons where one day you've got half a class and the next day you've got the other half of the class? What kinds of things would you say to teachers around that and the values?
Well, I do think that every home, every family has issues that are very, very difficult to handle, whether it could be dad who's unemployed, or mom unemployed, or family members who are critically ill. And what it is to actually say to the children and to teachers to have the discussion about what can you practically do to help. So in other words, compassion and all values aren't just theories. They're not things that you can see. I'm not an airline pilot. I don't put this on properly. Okay.
It's working.
It's working. But so what it is, it's to say, how do you do it? And the other day I was talking to a kid, and he was telling me how his mom had become very ill, and she'd been literally, the family, she had mild COVID, she was staying at home. And then he said, oh, gee whiz, I've never made so many cups of tea in my life. And I just thought, well, that's compassion, just practical. So that to me would be just a practical thing. And then, of course, teachers, when they're teaching the different subjects, particularly languages, there are countless stories that you can tell that this is a compassionate way of behaving. So that would be just two thoughts on that.
Those are lovely. And I think it's just as having the chat with teachers and just creating the awareness that it's just, how do we set the example in terms of just being kind to the children in these strange times, that they can then translate that back to home.
Yes, yeah.
Richard, the second pillar talks about leadership. So you spoke that this book is related to teachers in a way, but also to anybody. Why is leadership so important from a teacher's point of view? So looking at it as your book describes, and how to guide for teachers.
Yes. The point about leadership is that too often people see leadership as coming from the principal's office, or the head of department, the deputy, subject head. And the point is that a teacher, when he or she walks into a classroom for the very first time in their teaching career, they are a leader. Mm-hmm. If it's a daycare center, it's kids sitting on a big carpet, and they're listening to this teacher telling them who she is and what we're going to do. Whether you're walking into a high school classroom, it's the first time, you are, let me use the word, you are the authority figure, in the sense that your position gives you that authority. And so what it is that the book makes the point that doesn't matter where you are in the school, whatever your position, you are a leader. And as a leader, you've got to work out, how do you lead? And of course, there are many ways you can lead. I use the word authority, but you rather use the word assertive, but you soon get into a style of leadership. So it could be you're very democratic, you're authoritarian, you're assertive, you have high emotional intelligence, all of these things. So I think that there's something wrong in our school system that when it comes to a thing like leadership, we always say hand it over to the person who gets R2.50 extra a month because they're the school principal. You've got to say, no, actually, we're all leaders. And of course, there is a range of leadership styles. It's to understand what they are. And of course, the book actually goes into them and challenges and asks, well, are you doing this? Are you doing that? And also when we talk of leadership, it's very much linked back to values, because you can have a school that has every single facility that it should have. It can have all the computers in the world. It can have very well qualified teachers. But if the leadership is authoritarian, if the leadership is harsh, if there's lack of emotional intelligence, lack of caring, lack of kindness, it is not a quality school. And so often schools are measured by the fact that they get brilliant matric results, or the school is outstanding at sport or extramural activities. But I would put it differently. An excellent quality school is a school that is driven by values that the parents, the children, the teachers agree, define. This is the way, as this kid's told me in his guttural voice, this is the way they do things here.
And that is so beautiful in terms of, if we got that right, it's the whole community. And so we're valuing each other and respecting each other. And if we come from a space of respect and value, you just have a completely different community. To those of you who are watching, if you've got any questions for Richard, please pop them in the chat. We would love to answer your questions. Richard, I want to ask another one. In terms of your plan, you then go on to an improvement planning. So you are then saying that there is something that you've got and we need to improve it. What are the sort of, is the main tip you would give to people around this that they could look for in the book?
Well, I make the point that in total quality management theory, they say there are two kinds of approaches to improvement.
Yes.
In other words, two main ways in which you set out on goals. And the first one, just to use a little bit of Japanese now, the one is called Kaizen, K-A-I-Z-E-N. And this means that when you make change, they can be very gradual change. And I think what has happened, if we go back to South Africa in 1994, we made some radical changes to our education system, and they were too fast. We didn't have the people to implement them. And so what it is that you can make changes that are just gentle. So, for example, you walk into a classroom and the teacher is, she just looks at this class from hell. And every teacher somewhere in their career will have a class from hell. And you just say, what do I do with this class? Are you with me? And so it's the gentle little things that you start, even if it's things like when the children come in, when you come into my class, you just stand quietly by your desk. When I tell you to sit down, and there's always some ox that sits down straight away, you say, excuse me, I said when you sit down. I haven't given you permission yet. When you sit down. And so in other words, you even get the start of a lesson going well. And then every class has one or two ringleaders. So you deal with the one or two ringleaders. Can you hear? It's very gentle steps. And eventually, if you just go gently about things, you get that. So that would be a simple thing. Or a school's got a litter problem. Every school has a litter problem, actually. You've always got to fight. Come on. You've got to tell them, come on. This is not half an hour after a rugby match at Ellis Park. Come on. Are you with me? So that would be it. Or I had a lovely example a month ago where this teacher was in a school and she was just very aware that the boys were very aggro. And so this was her Kaizen plan. She turned to the head of the school and to other teachers, and they started a karate club, but only for the girls. And I just thought that was a gentle, very effective way of making improvements. That's Kaizen, gentle, step by step. Okay. Then, of course, you've got the other one, Hoshin, H-O-S-H-I-N. This is, again, a Japanese word, so the second Japanese word tonight. And that is that this, that obviously somebody thinking that this is the Johannesburg morgue or something. But anyway, But Hoshin goals are goals that are radical, enormous. Okay. And a very good example was Madiba. When he became president, it was a radical transformation of society from a segregated to a desegregated society. And a school, for example, might want to build a new teaching block or build a hall. These are enormous projects, and they don't just happen instantly. They take time. And I think what happens is that people walk into situations and they look and they say, it's beyond me. It's like the one teacher said, I'm in a terrible school. I'm so unhappy. I can't get out because I have 3 children. I'm a single mom, and my kids are all at schools in this town. And nothing can change. I said, no, you can start in your classroom. It's that's like the pebble that's dropped into the pool. It spreads.
That's very, very true. And so if we think about that and change, so whether you make small steps or whether you make huge kinds of changes, it all goes down to the planning and how we do it. So even the examples you gave where the teacher is the way she's starting or he's starting the lesson, the teachers had to think about how am I addressing it. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're getting people to think about the situation and saying, how do I handle it? There is a solution. Think about it. Make it personal. Don't choose something from somewhere else. Look at your situation and how do I improve where I'm at now? Is that what you say?
Yes. And it's like the teacher told me about the karate. You know, I just thought, well, here she walks into a classroom. There's this macho element in the classroom. And she's not confrontational. She just says, the girls, we are going to start karate in school. And of course, there's a lovely end part to this. The boys sent the teacher a petition asking if they could join karate. And she said, no, it's for the girls. But it just changed the climate because karate has its own discipline about how you treat others. You've only got to look at me to realize I don't do karate, but I understand that that karate teaches, how should we say, self-respect and respect towards others.
That's true. And then your fourth one talks about communication. Why do you think communication is such an important part of quality education?
Yeah. Well, I think every single teacher who's listening to this, every single principal who's listening to this, anybody in any sort of position where you are interacting with other people, hear this little frame. Why didn't they tell me? I never got to know this. No matter how hard you try, you never get perfect communication. But it's a very important part because so much unhappiness is caused because there's a lack of communication. People don't get the message. So that's a very basic level of communication in verbally, in writing. And of course, I don't have to tell you body language. We communicate through body language. So a child is talking while you're speaking in class. You just look at the child and you go like this. And he gets the message. Are you with me? In a nice way.
I don't do that too often.
Yeah, you know, and it's wonderful. I saw a foundation phase teacher, and there were maybe 300 children in front of her, and this is grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, and all she did was she came, and those folk watching who teach in the foundation phase will know the simple little thing. She just stands and puts her hands on her head, and the kids put hands on the head. And then she goes like this, and they put their finger on their lip. It sounds corny, but this is communication. Are you with me? And so it's communication that's verbal. And of course, you talk at a level that people understand. Don't try and be clever. Just talk simple, plain English. And of course, always remember that in a South African school, that many children in the class have English as their second, third, or fourth language. So show respect and speak in a way that's simple. But communication also goes a bit further. Communication looks at some of the very tough issues in a school. It looks at bullying.
Yes.
And of course, remember with bullying, that it's not only the kids who bully each other. It's in a staff room. Teachers bully each other.
Yes.
It's parents who bully teachers. And so what we're saying here is that it means that you've got to address these issues. So often in a school, things are swept under the carpet. Nobody wants to talk about bullying. You know, I remember going to one school, and when I arrived there, the headmaster told me that at this school we have no bullying. Well, I just thought to myself, Butti, you're not in the real world, because there will be bullying.
Yeah.
It's inevitable. Whenever a group of people are together, there will be the propensity for bullying. But a good school says, let's communicate, let's talk about it, and keep bullying down to an absolute minimum. So that would be it. And gender-based violence, that's a huge thing at the moment in South African society. Mm-hmm. But I say now, but let us be more honest and say it's been there all along. What has happened, thank heavens for communication, and as our society has become more open, these things come out into the open. And racism as well. And of course, there are so many instances of racism that go on. I do think part of communication is that we've got to understand each other. Mm. You know, everybody's got their own theory of what should have been done, say, in 1994. But I believe right at the beginning, we should have started out on diversity. We should have made everyone aware of our different cultures and who we are, and to respect those different cultures.
Yeah, and it goes back to your comments about values and respect. So if we respect each other and we understand each other and we've got values and we know each other's values, it just makes such a difference in terms of how we engage with each other. Tabila has just said, yes, karate teaches respect and discipline. So thanks for the comment. That's really cool. If anybody else has got comments or questions, let us know. Sorry, Richard, you were going to say?
No, and thank you to that person who asked that. And that's exactly what this teacher found. She found that the whole climate in her class had changed. The macho boys learned to be more respectful. And of course, they managed to cope with the fact that they weren't allowed to join the karate club with the girls. But it just made for a more caring, sensible kind of classroom. Yeah.
That's true. Your last pillar talks about techniques and tools. So what do you mean in terms of techniques and tools in quality education?
What happens here is that you've got values in place. So people know this is the way we treat each other. These are the values in our class. These are the values in our school. These are the values when we go out onto the sports field, and so on. We've got leadership in place. We've worked out our leadership styles, and we want to implement them. You have improvement plans, things you want to improve, and then, of course, communication. Techniques and tools are simply, so you've got all these quality ideas. That's lovely. But now, how do you implement it? And so, for example, take a thing like brainstorming, and I know some of you will be critical of it. You know, it has a negative medical terminology to it, and it's not meant that way at all. But brainstorming in its most basic way of just getting a whole lot of ideas out. Yes. Benchmarking is a very simple technique that every teacher can use. And if I can give you an example, when I was in education directly in a school, we often used to have meetings at different schools. Sorry, the airline pilot must just adjust this slightly. There we go. Okay. We'd have meetings, the district director or the regional head would tell us to go to school X or Y for a meeting. And I always used to make this point of, when I went there, if the meeting was meant to start at 10 o'clock, I used to arrive at, say, 10 to 10, 5 to 10, so that I could stroll slowly through the school to the school hall or the room where this meeting was, so that I could just walk slowly and see what other people were doing. And it's what I call theft, but of a very acceptable kind. You are stealing ideas. You are learning from people
Yes.
who are doing it maybe better than you or handling it differently. And then, of course, sometimes you are dealing with the whole fact that you're saying to people, we can work out ways to solve it. So benchmarking, a lovely way of just saying to people, we need a school uniform, for example, or we need a new tracksuit top, or we want to introduce a sports day. How do we go and work out how to do it? And how do we do it? We say to people, go and look what other people do. So that's one thing, benchmarking.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, and we learn from each other. It's like
Yes.
you and I, as you said earlier at the very beginning, we've done workshops together, and I've watched your techniques and some of the things I say, well, now let me try that as well. And then when people say, wow, that's a wonderful way you're doing it, and I hope you don't mind, but I never acknowledged you. No, I did.
No, you don't need to. So I think the
Yeah.
same, the things we learn from each other is just so important, and how we observe each other and see. So the same, when you see what other teachers are doing, you know what the teacher in the classroom is doing next door to you. Having those discussions and things are so important. Asking to just sit in and watch a lesson, for me, I think
Yes.
was always exciting to say, let's go and see what we are doing. And often we keep our classrooms to ourselves and we don't want to share, whereas we should actually be saying to people, no, come and have a look. Can I come into your class? Can you come into mine? And let's learn from each other.
Yeah. Every school, no matter what school it is, has brilliant teachers, virtually wonderful teachers. Benchmarking, as you've just said, may I please come into your class? And I remember from my very first year of teaching, I remember seeing some teachers, and there was one teacher, I thought, this is a wonderful person, this teacher. Let me ask what they do and go and see. I see there was somebody asked a question, Ryan.
Yes.
Bushiki asked about bullying. Hi, Ryan. And of course, now Ryan, he's obviously at school, and I know Ryan. Okay, so thanks for tuning in, Ryan. That's very kind of you. But the thing is that every school does have bullying. I've mentioned that. I think one of the things that's got to happen is that you've got to, when there's bullying, you've got to have the school climate that says, if there's bullying, bring it out front. You know, this thing about being a snitch if you go to the principal or head of department. You've got to stop that culture completely. It's like if you're a whistleblower in South Africa, it's a crime. They'll actually put a bullet in your head, which is exactly what's happened to certain whistleblowers in our society. And what it is the school's got to create a culture that says the heroes are the people who stand up and who make it a point of saying, this is what's going on. A little trick we had at school, and it was very, very effective, was that the kids didn't know when it would happen. We didn't tell them, but they'd go into a lesson. And when they walked in, every class across the school was given, every child was given a questionnaire. And the questionnaire asked questions like, have you been bullied? Or do you know people who have been bullied? Who was being bullied? Who are the bullies in your class? Who are the bullies in your school? And of course, the kids, they could sign it if they wanted to. If they didn't want to, that's fine. But I had an incident about that where a dad came because the teacher had said that this kid was a bully and that his son was a bully. And he was very arrogant. And he said, don't tell me that my child is a bully. But even his whole tone said, well, actually now I know why he's a bully. But anyway, but it was quite lovely when I said, what class is your child in? And I said, okay. And I went to that class, and there were something like 29 kids in the class. And I said, well, I've got the stats for this class. It was an anonymous survey. And of the 29 children in the class, 22 of them said your son is a bully.
Wow.
Place closed. Now we can work out how to help that child.
And
so
maybe look at the daddy and say to the daddy, what are you modeling?
Fantastic. Yes, you've got to be very diplomatic. That's why good principals have big desks. So if a parent wants to leap across, they've got quite a distance to leap across. But it is that.
Richard, Edward's just said, this is so interesting, Dr. Richard. So thanks, Edward.
Thank you very much, Edward. And Edward is part of the Tandalwazi outreach program, and he puts the teacher programs together. In other words, he gets all the presenters and organizes. I appreciate those kind words, Edward.
So Richard, you've now had a third version of your book. Why have you had different versions of your book?
I think they call it lifelong learning. and you also interact with people through the years. And as I said earlier on, where, like for yourself, where I have learned, say, from you, but I've learned from so many countless other people's. And of course, society changes and new things come to the fore. So you take a thing like something as simple as communication. You know that when I started out in my teaching career, you know that there were things called Roneo machines, so you think, where you Roneoed paper and you gave time. Now you've got instant communication. So you've got to up your communication levels. So I think there would be just one. And then, of course, as a society, we've also changed. Once upon a time, a good head of a school was somebody who was seen as authoritarian, somebody who said, this is the way it is, this is the way I want it. And as I say, he ran a tight ship. That was meant to be a virtue. With me. Now, there are times when you do run a tight ship. In other words, that the head says, this is the way, folks, it will be done because we need discipline or whatever. But you can't run the whole school like that. So when you ask, why is it a third version? It's a third version of the truth. Okay. So that would be why it's changed.
But I think that's wonderful that you've looked at it and changed it in terms of circumstances and how society's changed and how communication has changed and made it relevant. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, and if I can just say how society changes, it's like the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Mrs. Ardern. I can't think of her first name. It starts with a J. But here she was with the attack, on the mosque and the people that were the 50 or whatever people in New Zealand who were killed in those two at the attack in those two mosques. Now, it was very interesting. In the book, there's a picture, a photograph of her hugging somebody from the Muslim community, hugging her, and across the world saw that compassionate leadership is leadership that is essential in our modern society.
Rich, that is such a beautiful story, and I remember seeing that picture. It really had a real impact in terms of making you aware and think and all sorts of aspects like that, questioning all sorts of things, which is really great. Valentina is saying, could you remind me what the examples of leadership are that depict a non-quality school? So looking at it, I suppose, from a different point of view, from a negative point of view, what do you think is non-quality? Do you want to quickly look at that?
Yes.
And then maybe this ties into what Roger is asking. Roger is saying, Richard, how would you quantify quality in the education landscape? So I suppose those two questions almost tie into each other.
Yes. Well, to Valentine and Roger, thank you very much for your questions. I would think that if we were to take your point, looking at from the negative side, the negative side of leadership and the negative side of a school that isn't of good quality would be schools that actually doesn't have values. So it's almost to go back to the very first point. In other words, it's a school that's run in a harsh, uncaring, lack of thoughtfulness, and also, if you're allowed to use a word like gentleness. I do think that, we live in a society now where, when the robot turns green for you, you must remember, do not cross, if you live in Johannesburg, until 3 cars have crossed their red robot. And then only do you proceed. So in other words, here, this is a simple example of people not obeying the law. And I think in a school, for a school to be a quality school, there are laws, there are rules. And of course, remember, rules aren't imposed. Rules are agreed upon and people adhere to them. So it would be a school that lacks values, or it has a whole string of values. They paint them on the walls. Are you with me? But then you hear, we treat each other with respect, and then you hear a teacher shouting, full lungs, screaming, for heaven's sake, control yourself. Well, then you realize, well, maybe there's a disconnect between telling people what to do and what you should also do. Okay. And Roger, thank you for your comment about this little talk. That's very, very much appreciated. And Jafta, also, you've had a great, and you said great work, Karen, yes, because she does many programs with people from all backgrounds. Okay, thank you.
So Richard, as we end off, what is the tip that you'd like to give to people about why they should get hold of your book? Why do you think somebody should want to read your book?
Well, maybe the front cover that's on the screen now, maybe just says it, if you look at the picture, they're from different cultures, different groups, and quality education is a universal dream of people, that no matter what your background, no matter where you teach, you can create excellent quality schools. That I remember going to a place called Soshanguve, which is outside Pretoria. It is a very, very poor community. But the school was spotlessly clean. The kids were fantastic. They did well at sport and choir and drama. But the school was desperately poor. They had no money. But everybody, parents and children, they all work together. And so the book actually makes a very strong statement. You don't need money to create a quality school and a quality classroom. You just need heart, compassion, and a commitment to give, as teachers do, of their very best in a loving way to children.
Oh, Richard, I've just loved chatting with you this evening about your book and your absolute wisdom that you share with us. Every time I talk to you, I learn something new. So thank you so much for sharing this evening. For those of you who are watching, Richard's book is for sale. I put the document in the chat so you can get it from Amazon, from Smashwords, and also from Takealot. Please go and have a look at that and see how you could use it with your teachers, with your school, and just within your own lives. So I'm going to say, Richard, thank you so very much. Tabile, you saying thank you again to everybody who's joined this evening and who's been watching and who's added to the comments. We say thank you so much. I'm going to end the break. Oh, Richard, you want to say something?
No, just to say thank you very much to you for inviting me again, and also your big friendly smile and sort of making such a lovely chat. And to the folk who are watching, thank you very much. Now it's time to have supper. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night. Bye. Bye.